Victoria Sterling woke at 5:30, showered quietly and dressed in clothes that whispered rather than spoke. By 6, she was in the kitchen preparing breakfast for a husband who treated her like expensive furniture, necessary for appearances, but requiring no real attention. Adrian Blackwood descended the marble staircase at exactly 6:15 every morning, his tailored suits perfect, his dark hair styled to perfection, and his steel-gray eyes focused on everything except his wife. 3 years of marriage, and Victoria could count their meaningful conversations on one hand. She set his coffee cup down just as his polished shoes clicked against the kitchen floor. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream. She had learned his preferences. Through observation, not conversation. He took the cup without acknowledgement, scrolled through his phone, and left for Blackwood Industries without a word. Victoria remained at the kitchen island, eating her toast in silence, wondering how her life had become this beautiful, suffocating cage. The memories of how she ended up here still stung like fresh wounds. 3 years ago, she had been Victoria Sterling, a bright business graduate with dreams of changing the world. Then her father's construction company collapsed under the weight of bad investments and worse partnerships. The debt was staggering. Enough to destroy 3 generations of her family's modest wealth. Diana Sterling had made the arrangement with tears in her eyes and desperation in her voice. The Blackwood family needed their heir married to someone respectable, quiet, and manageable. Victoria's family needed salvation from financial ruin. It was business, pure and simple. Adrian had been coldly professional during their first meeting, explaining the terms like a merger agreement. She would be his wife in name, attend necessary social functions, and maintain the appearance of a stable marriage. In return, her family's debts would disappear, and she would want for nothing material. What she hadn't expected was how thoroughly he would ignore her existence. Victoria finished her breakfast and retreated to the garden, her sanctuary in this loveless mansion. She tended to roses that bloomed more beautifully than her marriage, finding solace in nurturing something that actually responded to her care. The vibration of her phone interrupted her thoughts. Adrian's name appeared on the screen. Unusual, since he never called during business hours. "Hello?" she answered, her voice careful and neutral. "Victoria." His deep voice carried its usual chill. "I need you to attend an event with me tonight." She blinked, startled. In 3 years, she had never appeared publicly as his wife. "What kind of event?" "Business gala, international investors. 7 o'clock. His tone suggested this was a command, not a request. Why now? The question escaped before she could stop it. A pause. "Business reasons. You're my wife. It's time you acted like it." The line went dead, leaving Victoria staring at her phone in shock. After 3 years of being invisible, why did he suddenly need her visible? That evening, Victoria stood before her closet feeling lost. She owned beautiful clothes. Adrian's money ensured she lacked nothing material, but she had nowhere to wear them. Finally, she chose a deep emerald dress that brought out her green eyes, something she had bought in a moment of optimism that had long since faded. At exactly 7, she descended the stairs to find Adrian waiting in the foyer. He looked devastating in his black tuxedo, every inch the powerful billionaire CEO. When he saw her, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe even appreciation, but it vanished so quickly she thought she imagined it. "You look acceptable," he said, offering his arm with mechanical courtesy. Acceptable. Victoria swallowed the hurt and placed her hand on his arm, feeling the warmth of his body through the expensive fabric. It was the first time they had touched in months. The Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom glittered with wealth and power. Victoria felt like an actress playing a role she hadn't rehearsed. Adrian's hand rested on the small of her back as he guided her through the crowd, introducing her with practiced efficiency. "My wife, Victoria," he would say, his voice giving nothing away. Most people smiled politely and moved on, but Victoria noticed how the women looked at Adrian with obvious interest, and how the men's eyes lingered on her with appreciation. She began to understand why Adrian had brought her. She was beautiful arm candy, proof of his desirability and stability. Then she met James Thompson. He was different from the others. Warm brown eyes, genuine smile, and an easy confidence that didn't seem predatory. When Adrian introduced them, James took her hand and held it a moment longer than necessary. "Mrs. Blackwood," James said, his British accent adding charm to his words. "Adrian's been hiding you away. I can see why. If I had a wife this beautiful, I'd want to keep her to myself, too." Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks. When was the last time someone had complimented her so directly? Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "James is expanding his operations into South America," Adrian explained, his voice carefully, neutral. "He's looking for local expertise." "How fascinating," Victoria said, surprised by her own interest. "What kind of business?" "Sustainable development projects," James replied, his eyes lighting up. "Ecotourism, renewable energy. I believe business should benefit communities, not exploit them." As James talked about his work, Victoria found herself genuinely engaged for the first time in years. Here was someone who saw business as more than profit margins and market dominance. "You seem very knowledgeable about international markets," James observed. "Do you work in the field?" Victoria felt Adrian's hand tighten on her back, a warning. "I studied international business, but I don't work," she replied carefully. "What a waste," James said, and Victoria's heart fluttered at the genuine regret in his voice. "Someone with your intelligence should be making a difference in the world." Before Adrian could respond, James was pulled away by another investor, but not before slipping Victoria his business card. "I'd love to continue our conversation sometime," he said with a smile that made her feel truly seen for the first time in 3 years. The drive home was tense with unspoken words. Adrian's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, his jaw set in a hard line. Victoria stared out the window, James's card hidden in her purse like a secret. "Interesting evening," she finally said, testing the waters. "Thompson seemed quite taken with you," Adrian replied, his voice dangerously quiet. Victoria turned to study his profile. "Is that a problem?" "You're my wife." "On paper," she shot back, surprised by her own boldness. Adrian pulled into their driveway and cut the engine. In the sudden silence, Victoria could hear her own heartbeat. He turned to face her, his gray eyes intense in the dim light. "You are my wife, Victoria. In every way that matters." "Really?" she challenged. "When did you decide that?" "Because for 3 years, I've been nothing more than an expensive decoration in your perfect life." Something shifted in Adrian's expression, a crack in his icy composure. For a moment, Victoria thought she saw something vulnerable beneath the surface, but then his mask slipped back into place. "Things change," he said simply. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Yes, they do. But sometimes it's too late." She got out of the car and walked into the house, leaving Adrian sitting alone in the darkness, finally forced to confront what his neglect might cost him. That night, Victoria lay in her separate bedroom, James's business card on her nightstand. For the first time in 3 years, she felt like a woman worth wanting, and the feeling was both terrifying and intoxicating. Down the hall, Adrian paced his study, replaying every moment of the evening. The way James had looked at Victoria, the way she had smiled in response, the way she had challenged him in the car, it all pointed to one terrible truth. He was losing her, and he hadn't even realized she was his to lose. The game had changed, and Adrian Blackwood was no longer sure he knew the rules. Victoria woke to the sound of movement in the kitchen below. Strange. Adrian always left before she stirred. Curiosity drew her downstairs where she found a sight that stopped her cold. Adrian stood at the stove, still in his silk pajama pants, and white t-shirt, flipping pancakes with surprising skill. The kitchen island was set for two, complete with fresh orange juice and coffee that smelled like heaven. "Good morning," he said without turning around, his voice softer than she'd heard in years. Victoria remained frozen in the doorway, wearing nothing but her silk nightgown and confusion. "What's happening?" "Breakfast." He turned, and she caught her breath. Without his armor of expensive suits, Adrian looked younger, more human. His dark hair was tousled, and there was something vulnerable in his gray eyes. "I thought we should eat together." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Adrian set down the spatula and faced her fully. "Because I've been an ass for 3 years, and I'm tired of pretending you don't exist." Victoria's heart hammered against her ribs. "What changed?" "Last night, watching Thompson look at you like..." Adrian's jaw clenched. "Like you were something precious, something worth treasuring. It made me realize I've been blind." Victoria moved cautiously to the island, accepting the plate he offered. The pancakes were perfect, golden and fluffy. When had he learned to cook? "This doesn't erase 3 years of indifference," she said quietly. "I know." Adrian sat across from her, his eyes never leaving her face. "But I'm hoping it's a start." They ate in charged silence. Victoria was acutely aware of how the morning light caught the silver threads in Adrian's dark hair, how his strong hands moved as he cut his food, how his eyes kept drifting to her mouth when she spoke. "I called Thompson this morning," Adrian said suddenly. Victoria's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Why?" "To decline his proposal for partnership." Adrian's voice was carefully controlled. "I told him Blackwood Industries wasn't interested in his projects." "That's not your decision to make for me," Victoria said, anger flaring. "You're right." Adrian set down his fork. "That's why I'm offering you something better." "Better how?" "Work. With me. At Blackwood Industries. I need someone with your expertise for our Latin American expansion." Victoria stared at him. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a partnership. Professional and..." Adrian hesitated. "Personal, if you'll have it." Before Victoria could respond, her phone buzzed. James Thompson's name appeared on the screen. Adrian's eyes darkened as she answered. "Victoria, darling." James's warm voice filled the space between them. "I hope you slept well. I've been thinking about our conversation last night." "James, hello?" Victoria was hyper-aware of Adrian watching her every expression. "I have a proposition for you. Dinner tonight to discuss the position I mentioned. I think you'd be perfect for my team." Victoria looked at Adrian, whose knuckles had gone white around his coffee cup. Something reckless stirred in her chest. "I'd love to," she said, maintaining eye contact with her husband. Adrian's face went stone cold. The moment she hung up, he stood abruptly. "So that's your answer," he said, his voice like ice. "You had 3 years to make me an offer," Victoria replied, standing to face him. "I'm not going to drop everything just because you've suddenly decided. I exist. This isn't about business, and we both know it." Adrian stepped closer, and Victoria caught the scent of his cologne mixed with something purely masculine. "He wants you." "So what if he does?" Victoria lifted her chin defiantly. "At least someone does." The words hung between them like a challenge. Adrian's eyes blazed with something primitive and dangerous. "You think I don't want you?" His voice dropped to a whisper that sent shivers down her spine. "You've never shown it." Victoria breathed, but she didn't step back when he moved closer. "I've been a fool." Adrian's hand rose to touch her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "But I want you, Victoria. I've wanted you from the moment I saw you in that emerald dress last night. Maybe before that, and I was just too stubborn to admit it." Victoria's breath caught. "Adrian..." "Don't go to dinner with him," Adrian said, his forehead almost touching hers. "Stay here. Let me show you what kind of husband I can really be." For a moment, Victoria wavered. The heat radiating from Adrian's body, the intensity in his eyes, the way his thumb was still stroking her cheek. It was everything she'd dreamed of for 3 years. Then reality crashed back. One morning of pancakes doesn't erase 3 years of neglect, she said, stepping back. I'm going to dinner with James. Adrian's hand dropped and his expression hardened. Fine. But when you come home tonight, we're going to finish this conversation. It wasn't a request. That evening, Victoria chose her outfit carefully, a midnight blue dress that hugged her curves and made her feel powerful. James took her to an intimate French restaurant where candlelight danced across their table. You look absolutely stunning, James said, taking her hand across the table. Blue is definitely your color. Victoria smiled, trying to ignore the way her skin prickled with awareness when he touched her. It felt wrong somehow, like a betrayal of something she couldn't name. Tell me about this position, she said, steering the conversation to safer ground. James's eyes lit up. I need someone to oversee our South American operations, someone with your education and intuition. The salary would be more than generous, and you'd have complete autonomy. It was everything Victoria had dreamed of. Meaningful work, financial independence, respect for her abilities. So why did it feel hollow? There's something else, James said, his voice dropping. I have to be honest with you, Victoria. This isn't just about business. Victoria's stomach clenched. James! I know you're married, but what kind of marriage is it really? You deserve someone who sees how extraordinary you are. His thumb stroked across her knuckles. Come with me to Argentina next month. See what life could be like. Victoria stared at their joined hands, her mind racing. James was offering her everything. Career, adventure, a man who actually wanted her. It should have been an easy choice. But all she could think about was Adrian's thumb tracing her cheek that morning, the vulnerability in his eyes, the way he'd said her name like a prayer. I need time to think, she said finally. James nodded, though disappointment flickered across his face. Of course. But don't take too long. Some opportunities don't wait. When James dropped her off at home, Victoria found all the lights off except one, Adrian's study. She climbed the stairs slowly, her heart pounding with each step. The study door was open. Adrian sat behind his desk, still in his work clothes but with his tie loose and his sleeves rolled up. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, his gray eyes unreadable. How was dinner? He asked quietly. Educational, Victoria replied, stepping into the room. Did he make you an offer? Victoria nodded. A good one, job in South America, complete independence. Something flickered across Adrian's face. And I told him I'd think about it. Adrian stood slowly, moving around the desk to face her. What's to think about? It's everything you've wanted. Is it? Victoria searched his face. I thought I knew what I wanted, but today changed things. How? Victoria took a shaky breath. You changed things. Pancakes and coffee, and looking at me like I matter. Adrian stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. You do matter. More than I ever realized. Prove it, Victoria whispered. The challenge hung between them like a lit fuse. Adrian's eyes darkened, and when he reached for her this time, there was nothing hesitant about his touch. His hands framed her face as he kissed her, and Victoria felt 3 years of loneliness and hunger pour into that kiss. She melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt as he backed her against the wall. God, Victoria, Adrian groaned against her lips. I've been such a fool. Yes, you have, she breathed, but her hands were already working at the buttons of his shirt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. Don't take the job, he said quietly. Stay here. Work with me. Let me spend the rest of my life making up for the last 3 years. Victoria looked into his eyes and saw everything she'd been searching for. desire, regret, hope, and something that might have been love. "Ask me properly," she said. Adrian's hands slid down to her waist, pulling her closer. "Victoria Sterling Blackwood, will you give your husband a second chance? Will you let me love you the way you deserve to be loved?" The words she'd waited 3 years to hear finally came, and Victoria realized she'd already made her choice the moment he kissed her. "Yes," she whispered, and sealed her answer with a kiss that tasted like new beginnings. 6 months later, Victoria stood in the gleaming conference room of Blackwood Industries, presenting quarterly projections to a room full of executives who hung on her every word. The shy, invisible wife had transformed into a confident businesswoman who commanded respect through intelligence and grace. The Argentine project exceeded expectations by 30%, she concluded, her voice steady and authoritative. "I recommend we expand operations to Chile and Peru within the next fiscal year." Applause filled the room. Adrian, seated at the head of the table, watched his wife with undisguised pride and something much deeper. When their eyes met across the polished mahogany, heat flickered between them like a shared secret. "Excellent work, Mrs. Blackwood," said Robert Chen, the head of international operations. "Your strategy has revolutionized our Latin American presence." As the meeting dispersed, Adrian lingered behind, waiting until they were alone. Then he crossed the room to where Victoria was gathering her papers, his movements predatory and purposeful. "I mentioned how incredibly sexy you are when you're being brilliant?" he murmured, his hands settling on her waist from behind. Victoria leaned back against his chest, savoring the solid warmth of him. "Only about a dozen times today." Not nearly enough. Adrian's lips found the sensitive spot behind her ear, making her shiver. "I have something for you." He produced a small velvet box that made Victoria's breath catch. Inside nestled a stunning emerald ring, the stone the exact shade of the dress she'd worn to their first public appearance together. "Adrian, it's beautiful, but what's the occasion?" "6 months since you chose to stay. 6 months since we started over." His voice was rough with emotion. "I wanted to mark the day we really became husband and wife." Victoria turned in his arms, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You remember the exact date?" "I remember everything about that night. The way you looked in that blue dress, the way you challenged me, the way you kissed me like you were claiming me." Adrian slipped the ring onto her right hand. "I remember falling in love with my own wife." The words still had the power to steal her breath. Victoria had heard them before, whispered in their bed during passionate nights, murmured over morning coffee, declared during heated arguments that ended in even more heated reconciliations, but they never failed to make her heart race. "I love you too," she said, pulling him down for a kiss that tasted like promise and desire. They might have stayed like that indefinitely if Victoria's assistant hadn't knocked on the conference room door. "Mrs. Blackwood? There's a James Thompson. Here to see you. He says it's urgent." Victoria felt Adrian's body tense against hers. James had tried contacting her several times over the past 6 months, but she'd never responded. What could be urgent enough to bring him here? They found James waiting in the lobby, his usual polished appearance slightly disheveled. When he saw them enter together, Adrian's arm possessively around Victoria's waist, his face fell. "Victoria, thank you for seeing me." James's eyes took in her transformed appearance, the confidence in her posture, the glow in her cheeks, the obvious intimacy between her and Adrian. "You look happy." "I am," Victoria said simply. "What can I do for you, James?" "I'm in trouble." James ran a hand through his hair. "The Argentine project collapsed. I made some bad investments, trusted the wrong people. I'm facing bankruptcy, possibly criminal charges." Adrian's arm tightened around Victoria, and she could feel the tension, radiating from him. "What does this have to do with my wife?" James's eyes fixed on Victoria with desperate hope. I need someone with your expertise to help salvage what's left. You know the markets, you have the contacts now. I'll sign over 40% of the company if you'll help me rebuild. It was a generous offer, more generous than James could afford. Victoria studied his face, seeing the desperation there, the genuine fear of losing everything he'd built. James, I'm flattered, but I know you're happy. James interrupted. I can see it, but this is your chance to build something of your own, to be more than just Adrian Blackwood's wife. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria felt Adrian's body go rigid beside her, but when she looked up at him, she saw something different than the possessive jealousy of months before. He was waiting, trusting her to make her own choice. You're right, Victoria said finally, and she felt Adrian's sharp intake of breath. I could build something of my own, but I already have. She gestured around the Blackwood Industries lobby, then looked at Adrian with love shining in her eyes. This company, this marriage, this life, I'm not just Adrian's wife anymore. I'm his partner. In every sense of the word. We built this together. James's shoulders sagged in defeat. I see. I'm sorry I bothered you. Wait. Victoria's voice stopped him at the door. I can't help you personally, but I know someone who might be interested in your proposition. Robert Chen has been looking for expansion opportunities. Hope flickered, back to life in James's eyes. You'd do that for me? After everything? Victoria smiled. You helped me realize my own worth, James, even if it wasn't in the way you intended. After James left, Adrian pulled Victoria into his arms right there in the lobby, not caring who saw. I thought I was going to lose you again, he admitted against her hair. Never, Victoria said fiercely. I'm exactly where I belong. That night they celebrated in the privacy of their home, no longer the cold mansion where they'd lived as strangers, but a warm space filled with laughter and love. Victoria had redecorated, softening the harsh edges with color and life, just as she'd softened Adrian's heart. They made love with the passion that had grown stronger with each passing month, each touch a promise, each kiss a declaration. Afterward, lying tangled in their bed, not separate rooms, Victoria traced patterns on Adrian's chest while he played with her hair. Do you ever regret it? Adrian asked quietly. Staying? Giving up that independence James offered? Victoria propped herself up to look at him, her emerald ring catching the moonlight. Do you know what real independence is? Tell me. It's choosing to share your life with someone who sees all of you. The brilliant businesswoman, the woman who tends roses, the woman who cries at romantic movies, the woman who challenges you to be better. Victoria's voice grew soft with emotion. It's being loved for exactly who you are. Adrian's hand cupped her face with infinite tenderness. And do you feel loved, Mrs. Blackwood? Completely. Utterly. Desperately, Victoria whispered, sealing the words with a kiss that promised forever. Good, Adrian murmured against her lips, because I plan to spend every day for the rest of our lives proving it to you. 3 years of silence had become a lifetime of conversation. 3 years of distance had become an intimacy so deep it took Victoria's breath away. And a marriage of convenience had become the greatest love story she could have imagined. As dawn broke over their city, Victoria and Adrian Blackwood faced their future as true partners, in business, in love, and in a life they'd chosen to build together. The arrangement their families had made was long forgotten, replaced by something infinitely more precious, a love they'd fought for, earned, and would treasure for all their days. The woman who had once been invisible had found her voice, her strength, and her heart's true home in the arms of a man who'd learned that the greatest wealth wasn't in his bank account, but in the love of an extraordinary woman who'd chosen to stay, and they lived passionately, completely, and utterly in love ever after.